Hey, welcome back to another episode of Brilliantly Resilient Live. Look, I'm like smiling ear to ear because I have been wanting to talk to Justin Batt, who's our guest today from Daddy Saturday, since a year ago when I was listening to his TED Talk on one of my runs through the big park near me and literally stopped in the middle of the park to stalk him on LinkedIn and say, I don't know what we're going to do together, but we have to work together at some point, because the TED Talk was hitting every nerve that I have in terms of parenting and my outlook on life that was shifted years ago. So Justin, I am so happy that you're joining us today.
Well, glad to be with you. And Kristen, I can say the same thing when I learned more about your organization. So we're just two peas in a pod, and excited to be on the show and have a chance to talk with you as well.
Awesome. So, okay, there's so many things that we could cover with your journey and all, but let's give it. Can you just give an overview of Daddy Saturday, which makes me smile every time I say it, and how this came to be in a nutshell?
Yeah. So the long story short is that over a decade ago, my wife was a teacher, and she came to me and wanted to leave the teaching industry and just said, Justin, I want to start my own business. And I said, amazing. So I'll support you. You got to come back with a business plan and we'll figure it out. So she came back and it was babies or bridal. And I said, look, that's amazing. You got birth, you have death, and you get married in between. So I love the models. And we landed on bridal and just kind of went for it. This was right in 2008 during the beginning of the recession. So probably the best time in history to open a business, right? We launched into it with no money in the bank account, just a dream and a vision of two entrepreneurs trying to go after it, me supporting her and her starting out in her dream. And we had our first child, Hayden Olivia, at the exact same time she opened the store, and in fact named the bridal boutique after Hayden Olivia. And so I found myself at home, a corporate America dad with a daughter at the time of 2 weeks old, by myself on Saturday all day with my daughter. And it was fun. We played, she took naps. It wasn't that difficult. I became an expert diaper changer. But then fast forward, and we had 3 more kids to the mix. So now 4 kids, 3 boys in a row. And I found myself at home on those Saturdays over that time with 2 and 3 and eventually 4 kids. And I was that corporate America dad who had progressed in my career. I was stressed out, tired, overwhelmed, burning the candle at both ends most weeks. And I would have my kids on Saturday support my wife. And I just wasn't having the days that I wanted. I wasn't seeing the results of those days, creating the memories. I was frustrated. I was tired. Often my kids felt like an inconvenience or a burden rather than the blessing that they were. And I was just honest with myself. And I said, hey, I want more. So what can I do? And I sat down and I just prayed about it and thought about it, and eventually came up with this idea of creating these epic moments and these epic days that we could have together on those Saturdays, and creating a game plan to make that happen. So we started doing it. And in my backyard with my 4 kids, we began to do obstacle courses and build things and have water balloon fights and bubble wrap battles, and anything I could think of or source from YouTube, we were doing it. And I just saw this immediate change in my relationship with my kids, in my relationship with my wife, our communication, and everything just changed in those perspective moments on those Saturdays. And my kids affectionately named it Daddy Saturday. And so that's how it began. And then I gave a TEDx 2 years ago, and that TEDx was on the topic of fatherlessness. And I just recognized the immediate need in our country for, one, the lack of a father in the home, but secondly, the fathers who are there, who are physically present, but they're just emotionally absent. And that just lit my fire. And I just had this passion to say that was me. And I had a recipe. I had something that I could do, a playbook, if you will, that could help those dads to break out of that. And that was my calling to change the next generation and make an impact in society. So then we launched the entire platform, which is now a movement around the world to be intentional and engage with your kids and to create good kids that become great adults.
I love it. And you know what? So when I first heard your TED Talk, I was saying it struck so many nerves. I want to get to the one point soon, but what I wanted to say was, I don't think I've told you, there's 5 kids in my family. I have 4 brothers. So I'm with your daughter on that one. Like, it's quite an interesting road, but we didn't have anything. We had hardly anything at all. But my dad, and he was, shift working, but when he was present, he was present. And I'm telling you, I'm almost 50 years old and I still do the silly backyard games, and camping was our big thing. I didn't know when I was a kid that we couldn't afford hotels. We went camping because that was way cheaper, and we became like expert. He's still like, when the sports teams of my kids now, his grandchildren, have camp outs and stuff, He's got the tent that everybody talks about, you know, like pop drops off the tent. But those little things, the obstacle courses, the relay races, all, you don't have to have a bazillion dollars. You don't even have to have an acre of land. We had a teeny tiny little townhome with a teeny tiny backyard, and we still talk about all those silly things. But it goes, I mean, it's been through my whole lifetime that it still has impacted me.
Yeah, we use this theme in Daddy Saturday that it doesn't have to be expensive, extravagant, or extraordinary to be epic. And you simply have to use what you have, right? And half of it is just the planning. So it's taking that time to be engaged, to say before Saturday or before any day, right? Daddy Saturday, let me put a disclaimer out there. Daddy Saturday is not just about Saturdays, by the way, clearly, right? It's about that being intentional, engaged at all times with your kids. But those Saturdays are, we typically have more time as fathers to spend with our kids or as parents. And so it doesn't have to be expensive, doesn't have to be extravagant or extraordinary to be epic. You just have to use what's around you and make a plan and create a game plan. And that's why we've created all these resources to make it even easier and to eliminate the excuse of, I don't know what to do or how to do it with my kids.
I love the fact that not only does it not have to be expensive, extravagant, or whatever, but I think what people get overwhelmed by is when you look at Saturday and you think the whole day, oh my God, what am I going to do with these kids all day? It doesn't have to be all day. It has to be that like really fun thing that you do, like the obstacle course or the bubble wrap thing or whatever, but that you're there, that you are engaged in that moment. And even if the activity only lasts an hour or an hour and a half or whatever, and then everybody kind of does their own thing, that's what it's about, right?
100%. You know, and I kind of was like the beta lab, right? Where I had to spend 8 to 10 hours with my kids and entertain them and keep them safe and healthy and have fun at the same time. And so I put in all those hours and I figured out what works, what doesn't. And now most of our Daddy Saturdays, you know, my kids are older. They're 12, 10, 8, and 6. And so they've got activities, they've got things to do on Saturdays. So it's not like when they're younger where you had that time with your kids where you had them all day. And so we still do Daddy Saturdays, and most times it's an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours maybe, where we're doing our activity, unless we're doing something as a family, and it still works. So the point is just to be prepared, create something that'll go and create that memory. And again, doesn't have to be expensive, extravagant, or extraordinary to still be epic. What I've found is that the kids, once you start this as a routine, they begin to ask for it. And so they're going to want to say, what are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing for Daddy Saturday? And so you have to have that idea ready. And again, it doesn't have to be this big extravagant thing. It can be simply something where you do something together for an hour, inside if it's not nasty outside if it's great outside, and you just go do it. The other thing I found is for the moms out there and for you two listening, right? It's a huge way to serve your wife, because you can give them a break during that time.
Thank you.
And it's simply, you know, you just take them away and you say, you know what, you've got an hour, you've got 2 hours, whatever time that is, to go do whatever it is you want to do. Go get a mani-pedi, go take a nap, go out with your friends, like whatever you need to do housework, whatever it is you want to do. It's your time, but the dad is taking the kids during that time, and it serves both parties really well. So when I say it enhances the marriage, right, that's a great way to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think that, Kristen and I were talking before we had you on here, and do you think that fathers have been kind of like marginalized? I think there's a tendency to think that if the bills are paid and, you know, the dad's doing his job, which is taking care of the family, that's meant financially for a very long time. Not that women, you know, obviously aren't part of that, but I think we still have that mental headset where that's the dad's job. And as long as the dad's doing that, then he doesn't have to be involved in another way. But families suffer when the dad's only doing that.
Yeah, so the provider role, right, is what we're talking about. And so often in our society, the dad was viewed as provider, and that is an important role. But now that we have more dual income families and both parties are working, right, that provider role has shifted and changed over time. And so mom may be the breadwinner. Like, look, I always say my wife, she got her MRS degree in college because she found me. And then I got my MR degree after college for my advanced degree because she's an entrepreneur and a business owner, and she's contributing highly to our family. So it works both ways. Mm-hmm. And I think that the important thing there is that dad just can't be a provider. That is a part of the role. And that is a part of the contribution to the family, is the financial provision, but it can't end there. And it certainly, if it does only end there, then there's a huge gap. And that oftentimes is what necessitates that physically present but emotionally absent father. It's like, hey, end of the week, I did my job. I worked hard all week for you guys. Now it's my time, and I'm going golfing or going out with my buddies or doing whatever it is I want to do because I've already provided. when in essence, I'm shifting that whole model and saying, that's just the beginning of your duty to your family. It also continues and carries over. And you also need to be, the leader of the activities, the leader of the engagement, and you need to be involved in your kids' lives at a higher level. You need to be the spiritual leader, the mental, the emotional. All of those capacities are really critical. And that's what we've tried to do in the platform of Daddy Saturday, is say, how can you address your kids beyond just being a provider? And in order to raise good kids to become great adults, and we're going to change that generation shift, we have to do that as men. The other thing I would say is that the whole concept of dad shaming is very real in our media and culture. You watch any TV show, you think of Homer Simpson, you think of Modern Family, like you just go down the list, right? And the way that they portray dads in the media so often is kind of that bum dad who's on the couch with a beer in his hand watching football. And that the role has to shift as well, and it is changing, but we have to change that as men. I always say that you can play the victim, and the victim will get you some sympathy, but sympathy carries no currency in today's culture or today's economy, and no one follows a victim. So as dads, we need to drop our pride, drop our ego, step up and make it happen.
Yeah, I love it. You know what I also love when you talk, this was the thing that struck me the most that made me stop and stalk you on LinkedIn in my run. It's the fact that, and this is the point that I've been trying to get across to a lot of people, and you helped me verbalize it in my own mind. When you talk in that TED Talk about you're not the kid's hero, your child is the hero of their own journey, and you're the guide. Right. And I so many times, and in my TED Talk, I talked about what I realized is I have such a strong bond with my kids because of the blindness of my boys. I had to be their sighted guide. Yep. And then so Mary Fran and I always talk about, we don't consider the sucker punches that happened in our lives blessings. I do not consider blindness a blessing, a curse, nothing. It just is, right? The blessing is that I had to be next to them and be their guide. I had no idea what to dream for them anymore. So they got to follow their own dreams. And I was just there on the side. I still am, just being their guide. And in that, I got to hear all of their hopes and dreams. They talked to me. Good God, they talk to me all the time. Sometimes in quarantine,
Stop
that's
talking.
a bit much, but they do. So we've had this interesting relationship. And then when I heard you talk about, yeah, they're the hero and you're just the guide. Can you elaborate for because you're so more eloquent on this topic than I am, for our listeners about that?
Well, thank you. And I think your TED Talk was amazing as well. And I resonated with that component about being the guide. And that is so critical. And here's what it relates to, right? So often, and you look at the millennial generation as kind of a stereotype or an example of this. And we had a generation of kids who came up where their parents didn't allow them to fail often in their youth. We had the helicopter parent, the snowplow parent, the bulldozer parent, you name it, right? Where kids were prevented from failing. And in doing so, what happened is they got into adulthood. They didn't fail at 8. So now they fail at 28, and failure at 20, it's a whole lot different than failure at 8. They have no mechanism of how to deal with that or handle success for that matter. And so when it does happen, it's catastrophic when they experience failure later on in life because they never had the mechanism of dealing with it as a child. And so the change is, and the mindset shift is to say, I'm going to make my kid the hero of their own story. I'm going to let them fall off the bike or scrape their knee. I'm going to be there to serve as their guide to pick them up and help them to learn from failure and to fail forward and to fail faster, but also not to get too high from success. And in doing so, I'm going to create a healthy child that grows understanding those two concepts and moves into adulthood with that as a foundation. Second thing it does that's super important, especially as a man, and this is really important for single moms too to realize, is that when you serve as the guide, you lower your ego and your pride and recognize I can't be all things to my kids. I have to let other people in who are experts at things that I'm not if I want to give my kids those experiences and make them more well-rounded. So you are the sight guide to your kids, right? You serve that role for them. I need guides in my kids' lives that can serve them in areas that I'm just not an expert in. My example I give a lot is I have a mentor who's great at deep sea fishing, saltwater fishing. I grew up in lakes and streams and ponds in Northwest Ohio. I didn't know how to go saltwater deep sea fishing. My kids wanted to do that. So he came in as a guide. He took us out literally as a fishing guide, took us on this amazing trip, deep sea fishing. We had a blast. I could have never done that on my own with my kids, but because I dropped my ego and my pride, allowed someone else to come in, my kids now have that experience, and my boys love saltwater fishing now. So that's a key component. The last piece is that when children get older, they move into a transition phase where they need a parent who is a guide, who's going to be there for those big critical moments, right? the marriage, birth of a child, where to go to college, buying the first home, those major life decisions that they struggle with in adulthood, they don't need a hero at that point. They need a guide who's going to be alongside them. And if you've played that role early in their life, it's a natural transition to play it later on in life as well. So those three things are so important. And as parents, we need to make that shift, make our kids the hero of their own story, and help them by being their guide.
So let
I
me put
love
you on the
that.
spot here. What do you say to folks, or do you have thoughts on, because look, at Brilliantly Resilient, we are all about failing. We fail epically here. We love it. And my kids, I'm like, try it, fail while I'm here to pick you up. We're all about failing. And blindness taught me that, because there's so much fail, but there's so much that comes out of that. But what do you say to the families right now that have the college graduates, the high school graduates that can't have their graduation, didn't finish out their semester? Because I don't know what to say anymore. All I know is I just don't want this to turn into so much more of that victim story. My poor kid that didn't get to have that graduation. Do you have thoughts on how to spin that?
So my whole platform revolves around the concept of intentionality. And I feel like that's the answer to this. So just be intentional. I've seen videos of a dad who built a stage
I
and
saw
wore
that.
the robe, right? And dressed up and it was like the daughter and the mom were in the audience in the driveway. And he was on the podium like he was the chancellor, right? Doing the graduation. She got to walk across the stage. I'm not saying you have to build a stage, but like, how could you recreate a special moment to make it epic so your child remembers that? And in fact, it's not the school doing it, it's you doing it. So it's probably even more impactful as their parent. I've seen a great friend of mine who had a prom for his daughter, and it was a daddy-daughter prom. It was the coolest thing ever. They had lights, they had the meal. It was such a special moment. It was incredible what he was able to do, and it didn't cost him hardly anything. But the value of that for his daughter was amazing. She got to have her senior high school prom. It happened to be with her dad. So I've seen examples of that over and over again, and I would go back and say it's all about being intentional. If you do play the victim and say, woe is me, my kid can't do this, well, everybody else is doing that. It doesn't solve anything. How could you change that mindset and say, let me be intentional. Let me think of a way that I could create an epic experience for my kids so that they have that moment, but it's with us and it's something they'll remember for the rest of their lives.
I love it.
One of the things that you said, and I'm hearing this as you're speaking, because Kristen and I talk all the time about how your values infuse your actions, and without necessarily saying it, you show people. And one of the things that you said in your TED Talk was more is caught than taught. So like everything that I'm hearing you say, you're not preaching at your kids. You're showing them through your involvement, through your intentional behavior, what's important and what your value system is. And they kind of pick that up through sort of, that they soak it in.
Yeah, it's so critical. The Ahmaud Arbery case came out, and, that was a tragic event. And I sat my kids down and we had a conversation at the table about racism, about race and discrimination in our country. And my kids are still really young. We had an open dialogue about it. And it was one of the most fascinating and probably impactful conversations I've ever had with my kids. But the interesting thing was I did it more as a checkpoint to see how I was progressing as a father in the way that I behave daily and what my kids are catching from me, right? So it was a teaching moment in that conversation, yet the big basis of it was how much have they caught from their dad and from their mom and the way that we treat other people and the way that we treat other races, right? And it was an amazing conversation. My kids, thankfully, answered the questions in their own way, in their own words, without being prompted. But it was a great reflection on the value system that we have as a family, trying to raise our kids with a biblical worldview. And it was amazing. So I think, that's part of that example is everything you do, you have to recognize you have little eyes watching you. And they're observing you through the eyes of a child at the same time. And so you can't look at them as an adult. You have to look at them through the eyes of a child and recognize they're watching everything you do. And so how do you rub off on them in a positive way? The other story I often tell is I like to do Spartan races. And Spartan races are extremely grueling and challenging. The physical exertion, the mental exertion is there. My kids do them with me, but they see me training every day. They see me working at that from an athletic standpoint and from a mental standpoint. And they start to mimic and to model some of those behaviors. They want to work out and exercise with me. So positive habits. They see how I eat. They follow my diet, right? They eat. They're still kids. We still let them have kid stuff, but they make healthier choices more often than not because they see me doing it and my wife doing it. There's so many things. My son, I take cold showers in the morning as a way to make myself uncomfortable often so that I get more comfortable being uncomfortable. My son, this was about a couple months ago, Mason, my middle son, he's screaming in the shower and I run in there like he's hurt. I said, well, Mason, what are you doing? He said, I'm taking a cold shower. I said, why are you doing that? He goes, because you do. And I'm like, yes, that's so awesome. And so, I didn't tell him he had to do it. I don't teach my kids to take cold showers. He just seen me doing it and seen me screaming like a girl in there so many times that he was emulating what I do as well and was getting the benefit from it.
I love it. Now, what would you say to families or fathers? What do you say to fathers that haven't done this yet? Is there a point when now you got to hope for the best and pray because you didn't intervene early enough? Or if they decide right now hearing this, oh man, I have not been intentional, where can I start? My kids are a little bit older, what do I do?
Yeah, great question. It's probably the number one question that I often get is I hear dads say, oh, man, I wish I would have had this 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, right? Or when my kids were younger. And what I would say to them is it's never too late. Mm-hmm. And you have to have this vision in your mind, this true north, this dad compass, if you will, of what you want that relationship to look like with your kids. And it's never too late to start. And, your kids always want a relationship with you. Mm-hmm. We go back to the hero and the guide concept. You are your kid's hero and you always will be. That's the point. And so they want that relationship. So what I would say is start to move towards your kids. Start small. You may be surprised. They may run towards you because they've been wanting that kind of relationship their whole lives. And now you're giving it to them. So they may fully embrace it. There may be some bitterness, some resentment, some barriers you may have to break down. So it may take time. And don't set expectations that are unrealistic and just continue to move towards them. A lot of dads, I work with a dad. I coach a lot of dads one-on-one. And one of them, he had teenagers. He's been his own self-admission, he's been completely unengaged from his kids their entire childhood. Now he wants to get re-engaged. He's like, how do I do this? Like, I've created so much damage over so many years. So his oldest daughter is going off to college after this year. And I said, have you ever taken her on a date night? He said, no, never. I said, take her on a date night. He's like, when should I go? I said, tomorrow, this week. Like, stop putting it off. Just go do it. How do I do it? Right? We walked him through all the steps. He takes her on a date night. And it was a pleasant conversation. It was kind of awkward, but they got done. And she said, Dad, that was really fun. Can we do that again? I'm like, he's in tears with me on the phone after that. And he's like, you have no idea what that just did for my relationship with my daughter for one date night. He's like, she's 17 years old. I've never done that. And you just gave me a gift that has just changed the relationship with my daughter for our entire future. Right? It makes me get emotional just even thinking about it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So, I'm getting all verklempt here.
So super cool, right? But that's the power of this. That's the power of intentionality. That's the power of engaging your kids. And it's never too late, even if you have adult children, right? And then I would say to those that have grandkids, you get a do-over. That's the coolest part of being a grandparent.
Yeah. Oh, baby, is it fun. And you get to play with Play-Doh. Like Saturday, Play-Doh is a built-in Saturday fun day thing.
That's right. So you can go there and far more is caught than taught. So go there and be the example for your kids who have grandkids, right? Or your grandkids, and help them engage in those principles as well.
Yeah. And I would chime in here to say, if anyone's listening that is doing both roles, that's what's happening in my house. I did the same thing. I had to reach out because I was so frustrated for so long that they didn't have somebody. And I thought, wait a minute, there are so many role models and wonderful men my dad is actually my middle son, who is a junior in high school. They're best friends. Like, I just had to look outside of our situation and find the guys that would be intentional. And I will say it is amazing when you start asking for that little bit of help. And, one of the guys took my college son out to lunch when he was on a break, and it like carried him for months. If you don't have that built in, you go look for it. Like you did with the deep sea diving, you can find somebody that can be a good role model too.
Kristen, that is so awesome. I'm so glad to hear you say that. That's the exact same thing. I get asked the question a lot when I do female-related podcasts, and they'll ask me that question. All the single moms listening, what advice would you give to them? And that's exactly what I say, is that you can't play both roles. You try, and I give so much respect and so much credit for what you're doing. But at the end of the day, they need that male influence in their life. They need that positive male influence. And if you don't have it in the home, you have to go find it. And it's mentors, it's coaches, it's teachers, it's other men. And the other call that I give is if you are a married man and you do have kids, or if you're a married man without kids, it's training for you. go step up and help a single mom in your community, right?
Yes.
How much does it take for you to say, hey, you have the single mom down the block, you're going to go play baseball with your kids, invite her kid to come with you so that you can include them. And that's a break for her. And it means the world to have that happen. So it's a
Yeah.
call on both sides, right? Dads that are there that have kids and have a family, they need to step up and be productive and help those single moms, the community as well.
Yeah, I love it.
You know, when you were talking about people wanting that relationship, I think it's so important to recognize that, especially when you have teenagers whose job it is to basically avoid you. Like that's what they want to do. At least they think that that's what they want to do. But inside, there's always that pull. So yes, you have to give them their space, but you also, I think, have to, as you said, be intentional in terms of reaching out and not assume that teenageritis means you should not be involved in your kids' lives.
Yeah, Mary Fran, that's a really important point. And I think that it all starts young. So my daughter and I started doing date nights when she was 3 years old. And that's what kind of started some of the genesis of Daddy Saturday and just my initial mindset around the importance of that one-on-one time, which is also critical. And, you know, she's now 12. And it was about a year and a half ago where she started to go through some of the female changes and was experiencing some of that and having a really rough time with it. And she wasn't communicating with my wife and with her mom at the level she needed to be. And she kind of felt like she was on her own and on an island. And guess what? All those daddy-daughter dates, all those times of just checking in and me walking into her bedroom at night before bed and just checking in and how you doing. And oftentimes she's like, Dad, get out of here. Like, ooh, Dad, leave me alone. Right. And that's fine. But I'm always there. And guess what? When she needed it, I'm like, let's go. We're taking the dog for a walk because I sensed it. And we get halfway on the block and she just breaks down and just unloads on me and just opens up about all these things she's struggling with and going through. And she felt comfortable enough to do that because we had built that bridge over time. We built that communication pathway through all those one-on-one dates all that time. So again, you know, being intentional is so critical because it opens the pathway for you to have that communication with your kids. Because frankly, you know, at the end of the day, they're teenagers, right? Mary Fran, you're right. They're going to pull away. The important thing is you want them to come back when they need it and when you need them to the most. And that's what you have to try to create.
Yeah. And I would also say, now I've got 20, almost 17, almost 16. So my hair goes gray on a daily basis. It's wonderful. But I will also say what I didn't realize is being their guide and having this relationship and all that, they also are comfortable enough to unload when they're upset with me.
Yes.
We have a mutual respect here where you can say you went too far, you know, especially those families going through divorce and all that. I said from the very beginning, I don't know how to do any of this. You know, my family, everybody's been together forever, but we need to call each other out respectfully, sort of kindly, apologize later when it didn't go so kind about that. And it's interesting. That just recently happened and I've never been so happy, which sounds ridiculous, right? That my kids can come and unload and say how disappointed they are in something and we can have that out and then everything is better after that you can have the arguments and the upsetment and heal it as opposed to just keep growing apart.
It goes back to, if we're going to come full circle, right? It's far more is caught than taught. And so you're also showing them how to communicate. I mean, when they have a future spouse one day or have to offer forgiveness or have that communication, you're showing them how to do that. And that's such a critical skill to have. And, you know, we as a family created some family values and our family mission and vision and all those things. And part of that is honesty and transparency. And my kids over time, we've watched them start to be able to exert themselves. And I can tell when something's off. And oftentimes it may be something that I did. Like I may have overreacted in a situation. I may have come down on them harshly or too hard. And for them to be able to come back and say, Dad, the way you did that, like it made me feel this way. And then it offers me the chance to say, you know what, I'm sorry. And of course, that's not what I meant. That's not how and I'm so sorry. And I want to make it right next time. And so we have that healing process that occurs. Well, what that does is it solves the bitterness and the resentment and some of those issues because we're able to be open and honest and transparent as a family and solve that. A lot of times we can do it around the dinner table too, as an entire family. We can call each other out. I think the other thing that it does is it's super fun. So before my kids go to bed every night, my boys are all in bunk beds in the same room right now. That'll change here shortly, but they love that process of all being together. And I go in and tell stories every night. And before they go to bed, I put my hand on their heart, on each of their hearts. And I say, is there anything you need to forgive anybody for? Is there anything anybody needs to forgive you for? is there anything you want to tell me? And is there anything you want to tell God? And it gives them a chance to express that openly, and the importance of offering forgiveness every night before bed. And then they can also talk to me during that point. They often don't say anything, but sometimes they do, or I can tell if there's something there. And then I say, what do you want to tell each of your brothers? And they say, I love you. I love you. And it's been the funniest thing to watch, because even though they're at each other all day, they'll say, I love you at the end of the day. And it's super cool to watch that happen. And they yell at their sister across the hall that they love her too. So that's something small that we do as a family when they're young, and you can do the same thing with your kids when they're young, but it just creates that dynamic again of setting those concepts and those principles in place.
Oh, I love it.
I have to say, my kids are all in their 30s. My baby just had her 30th birthday a couple of weeks ago, and I'm actually feeling pretty good at the moment just listening to you, because my son, the oldest, my son is in recovery from heroin addiction, and he's doing extremely well. He's got 3 kids, beautiful family, wife, everything's really great. But he is pretty much recreating his childhood with his kids. I see him doing things, I mean, like down to the toys. I mean, they've got every Ghostbusters toy in the world. It's insane. But he's creating parts of his childhood, and I'll see him doing these things and I'll think, oh my gosh, we did that with him. So the fact that they are at this point where they're having children of their own, your methods, and unbeknownst to me, apparently I good for me, I didn't know I was doing it, but I guess my husband and I were intentional enough that this can have lifelong benefits to when they have their own kids, and those values, he's instilling those in his own children.
So what you're speaking to is this concept called epigenetics. It's actually a science to say that.
Oh, look at me. I have a smart thing and I didn't even know it.
Yeah, Mary Fran, you're like way down the smart train here.
Oh, yeah, great. Okay. Great. She's got 4 books, 2 TED Talks. Now she's the smart train one.
I know. She's got it going on. So look, epigenetics is simply the fact that far more is passed down from your parents, your grandparents, and the generations above you than just your DNA. And it's the environment, it's the experience, right? It's even sometimes diet and the other components of that all get passed down. And so we're now seeing this play out. It's an amazing science around this concept. And so what it talks to is really the fact that your past is impacting your present, and how much of that do you want to impact your future? And most of us are never willing to look down deep and understand how much our past is actually impacting our present, both in the positive and the negative, right? Many times there's a father wound that was there. Even if you had a good father, a great father, there's still a father wound that was carried forward. And so examining what that is and saying, I don't want to do the same thing with my kids. And then you use that to change your future. So it's a really important component. And again, far more is caught than taught. So many of us, most of us, almost all of us, unless we didn't have a father figure or a parent in our lives, we take what we learned from our parents, and that is the number one thing that influences our parenting, right? Outside of culture. And so it is so important as a parent to recognize that's how you change the next generation. That's the importance of this whole platform that I've tried to build, is that as a parent, you are changing generations. It's generational, because what you do with your kids is going to be what they do with their kids and their kids and their kids.
And it impacts the ripple effect of that is huge. That's where you see the communities like mine that have the dads that are coming in and helping and coaching the teams and all of that. When the family does that, all that ripple effect through community is amazing. It has a huge, much bigger impact than your own home. But we could talk about this all day long.
We could go on and on and on.
I don't know if I've smiled this much in all of our episodes. It's just such good stuff, because you're just bringing up all these memories of my childhood and that impact on my kids and all of this important work that you're doing. I'm so grateful that you're doing it, because, you know, we talk about resilience, and if as we're equipping all of these adults now to uncover their own resilience, and then you put in your piece about helping your kids to be resilient, and then all of that just keeps trickling down.
It does. You know, resiliency is one of our core character qualities, in fact, that we try to build in our kids, because think about all that we're going through right now as a society. We need resilient kids if they're going to get through the challenges that are going to be there when they get into young adulthood and adulthood. And so helping them understand those concepts today of what builds resiliency, and a lot of that is failing. And failing forward and learning how to fail and move forward from that. Because look, life is like a series of crises, right? You go into a crisis and out of a crisis, and into a crisis and out of a crisis. So learning resiliency is an important skill set that they just have to have. And as parents, we need to model that for them.
Yeah, good
Completely.
stuff.
Well, Justin, this has been an amazing conversation, delightful, insightful, and I just love so many of the things that you said. So tell our listeners where they can find you and get on board this daddy train, because I want everybody on board your daddy train.
Awesome. Well, thank you all both so much. I have a tremendous amount of respect for both of you as well. And clearly you're doing a lot of things right as moms and have just crushing it in the mom game. So this was a 1 + or 2 + 1 = 4 conversation. So thank you for that.
Oh, cool.
DaddySaturday.com is our hub for all things Daddy Saturday. You can find really any of our resources there. We've got the book. We've got tons of free resources. We got an Alexa skill, a Google skill coming out soon that gives you ideas for free. It's super simple to use. You even have the items you might need right in your shopping cart on Amazon. So make it super simple. Lots of other tools there as well. And then dadboss.com is our newest resource. It's a 7-part digital curriculum for dads that is just life-changing. And it goes through a lot of these concepts very deeply. And then we have some coaching and other things that are coming off of that. So daddysaturday.com, dadboss.com, and you can connect with me directly at Justin Batt on LinkedIn.
Awesome.
Everybody check Justin out, please.
Thanks for all this great stuff. Thanks for the good stuff that you're doing, and have fun in Nashville.
Thank you.
Lucky Doug. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning into another episode of Brilliantly Resilient Live. And we will see you. When are we going to see everybody again?
I think tomorrow.
Bye, everybody.